Labą dieną.
Labą, prašau.
Kur norite?
Hello, nice to meet you, please.
Wait.
It's up to you. I will sit here, okay? Okay. So, missed me, yes? I'm honored to moderate this discussion, shaping the battlefield, adaptive decisions and structures. And we will have a wonderful panel to discuss what are lessons learned from Ukraine, how NATO is adapting, how Eastern flank is adapting. And I see Yurii is online, so I guess the best way to start this conversation is to give floor to him and to listen what are, in his view, the main lessons learned from Ukraine and what he could suggest to NATO regarding confronting Russia, fighting Russia, and winning Russia. Yurii, please. We don't hear you. Okay, just the technical issues. No, still not. No. I guess when we will fix those technical issues, we can go on with other panelists, and we will come back to you, Yurii, when everything will be okay. So let's start with a Major General. You had lots of experience, operational experience, headquarters experience, intelligence experience. How do you see the lessons learned for NATO and NATO Eastern flank regarding issues that we see in Ukraine, the tactical, operational, strategic implications? And do everything fits for us, for NATO Eastern flank? What fits, what's not? What is your opinion?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here among the crowd of the distinguished people and really pleased to be here. The way you portrayed the question, I would like to answer in the two parts. The part number one, which is realizing what NATO out of war realized what could be useful, and I'll go through the list a little bit. And then afterwards I will explain what actually happening in the NATO was implementing what was observed from the NATO side. First of all, the number one I would say is that out of this NATO realized that the direct attack on the NATO soil could happen. And because of this, of Russian invasion in Ukraine, NATO started or speeded up actually several processes. When I say NATO speeded up, we need to be careful here because NATO is not, there is a good saying about NATO, if NATO has 1 month to take decision, it will take 1 month. But if NATO has 2 hours to make a decision, it will take 2 hours and make decision in 2 hours. So it depends the angle. The second one is very important, that the NATO is back to the collective defense. When we look back before 22, NATO mainly was focusing out-of-area operations, crisis response operations, and what happened in 22 February, that NATO immediately said, we need to go back to our core essence of the NATO, which is collective defense. The key driver to back to the collective defense and realization that actually not we as the NATO have a choice of when it is happening, it's adversary. It's Russia in that case, has a decision when will attack us. So for that reason, we need to be ready anytime to defend. The third part, what is coming, is a force structure composition. So NATO looked at the war and said, okay, we need really to revise how we compose our forces. And you mentioned in your presentation the professional side, the conscription, the mobilization, and all those back on the table for the discussion and agreement. Very important part is the medical support concept. There are a lot of discussions and considerations. Is the so-called the golden hour still valid? What's going to happen with the mass casualties which is happening in Ukraine? What kind of stabilization system of first injuries on the first front line is in place? Is that effective? Not to disregard is innovation and scale of production and speed. And worthwhile to mention that the defense industry in the beginning was not up to speed to ramp up the production scale, which was necessary for the NATO to move forward and to support, first of all, Ukraine, and then to refill the stocks, which were empty before the war. Private sector. The balance between the government sector and the private sector, that's an important part, because what is happening in Ukraine, a lot of capabilities the private sector bringing at the table. So it is important to look how we are able to integrate the private sector together with the governmental sector, and at the same time to see are we on the governmental side need to develop something, or it is available in the private sector. And quality and quantity. I think we can discuss this later, but this is also a real issue which is at the table of NATO to discuss, is equality and quantity, how we're matching this. Just a couple of remarks on the proceedings with the implementation. First of all, it is important to mention that out of this, it was accelerated planning. So deterrence and defense in Euro-Atlantic area, regional plans is an important part which was brought to the table at the NATO and for our eastern flank. Establishment of the force structure requirements was a very clear, precise demand signal to the nations, saying this is what we need to defend NATO. Regional plans required an improved NATO force module, which needs from the nations to produce more troops. Updated NATO command and control structures, which is the new system in place. We need a new command and control system to command the troops. Very important part is that finally NATO got to the point where the capabilities being planned according to the threat-based planning principle, which was previously not that. So now it is very clear what kind of capabilities we need to find two main threats for the NATO, which is Russia and terrorist groups. In our case, it's Russia. And that will give a huge impact on the future and investment of all armed forces of all NATO nations. It's not only, regional, but also the rest of the NATO. Much higher stocks and ammunition and spare parts. It took a while to have those discussions, what our pre-stocking needs to be, but it's getting up and it's getting better. And the last point, which cannot be avoided, is an exercise program. Finally, NATO exercise program is focusing actually on the collective defense, large-scale exercises, and what is important, that we are finally getting away from our fictitious scenarios in which we're saying the certain country doing something. No, it's very clear what is happening, and the exercise is exactly focusing on this. That would be shortly on your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yurii, do we have you? Do you hear us?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so floor is yours, please.
Hello. Thank you very much. When we speak about shaping the battlefield and adaptive decisions and structures, the first we have to understand that the Russians have advantage on us in many times, in every types of weapon. We are restricted in all types of resources, personnel, weapons. We achieve the victories only if we can accelerate them, in planning, in technology, in realization. And in the beginning of adaptation was the order, and the order was with commander. Adaptation depends on the person, and the role of personality is highest in nowadays. Commanders became startup leaders for achieve new battle quality. I see 6 points of adaptation. Next slide, please. When we adapt, we can say about 6 points. The first, commanders of startups, because every unit with drones, with new technology, they are organized and they function like startups, the first business startups. The second point, battle accounting. Because you have to account your resources. And the third, about the tactics. To hide, to hunt, to hit, to hold. And this fourth, drone infrastructure. And fifth, network-centric stuff. And sixth, movie reports only. Very important for adaptation points. And some words about it. The first point, commanders. Let's look at commanders of the best known drone units, Ukrainian drone units. Next slide, please. Commanders of our drone units, they are not professional warriors. The majority of them, they don't have military education and military career in general. The best battle results in Ukrainian forces we have with a special regiment of National Guard of Ukraine, special drone units of National Guard of Ukraine. We will discuss about his results. And this unit was created, and with commander, he is agro-businessman, he is television manager. And all staff, they are not unprofessional warriors, but our general staff, they provided these units with unprofessional warriors, like very important step for adaptation for new conditions of the war. You know Magyar regiment by video in internet. He is from agribusiness. Battalion Luftwaffe, reconnaissance drone battalion, commander was politician. Rerog battalion of 24 brigade, engineer, commander. Flint, very best known commander of 92 brigade, trading business. The chief of battalion on 47 brigade, called sign Legion. He was DJ in 2014, volunteer soldier sergeant right now. And for example, you know very good 3rd Storm Brigade of Ukraine. All staff of this brigade, they are volunteer politicians, and they are not professional soldiers and officers. It's our, yes, we have very good combat officers. We had very good career professional military commanders. But for adaptations, for new conditions, we need a new quality of commanders, a new quality from business, from politics. And if you want to adapt, we have to looking for new leaders, new commanders for these adaptations. Is a very important lesson from Ukraine. And the same for new units of our armed forces. Next slide, please. Let's look for commanders, look at commanders of new storm battalions of armed forces in Ukraine. Our general staff, they formed new storm battalions for counterattacks on very important lines. And let's look for commanders of these 6 storm battalions. Majority of them, they are volunteers, only one professional commander. Because we see that our general staff, they try to adapt to new conditions of combats, and they are looking for commanders who can combine, who can to be provider, who can achieve the results, combining resources and the personnel. Our next slide. Next slide. Let's look at the kill list of best drone unit of National Guard. I say to you, commander of this drone unit, it's an agribusinessman and producer. It's the best drone unit of Ukraine, the best drone unit of Ukraine with best kill list. And let's look at results. It's more than all HIMARS rockets together, if we can see. All targets in this kill list, you can see it. All targets, it's with video fixation, because with coordinates, and we can prove every target, and we can see the real results of these drone units. It's very important factor of adaptation of Ukrainian army. We don't have enough rockets, we don't have enough artillery, we don't have enough artillery shells, but we can achieve big results with drones, with new types of drones. And we can produce it, we can finance it, and they are our priorities in modern warfare. We have nowadays we can say that the drone units, they are in every level. They're most effective kinds of weapon in the Ukrainian army, as the edge of our defense, and we can use it. We can use it for all types of battle tasks, for mining, for strikes, for logistics. And next slide, please. I want to say that for our best adaptive commanders, we have the same qualities. The same qualities, the qualities of most adaptive commanders for modern warfare, 10 points. The first, all them, they are team leaders. They are fund manager and fundraiser for all his units. Fundraiser for public finance. They are very best PR managers. They need to publish video for fundraise, for attract volunteers to his units. They have to communicate with society. They are HR manager to collect various people to his unit. They are responsible for his people, the first. They are responsible for his task. They have vision of battle, his own vision of battle. They are independent in planning. They control result, not processes. They are very open-minded, and they try to educate and to realize after-action review procedures. And the same qualities like in business startup leaders, we need for new most adaptive commanders who use many complicated devices or achieve victory. When we say about accounting combat, we have to understand that our war, it's a war about money. Every commander on every level has to account the price of decisions, risks and strikes. The biggest part of drones supply equipment our commanders have to receive only from volunteer funds. And they have to waste it only for priorities. All resources are restricted. All technologies are expensive. All the people is indispensable at our war. Drone-centric and network-centric warfare means many kinds of equipment. And before to order, we have to account the cost of these decisions. The combat is a complex of logistic, technology and personal decision, but the quantity of means are restricted. Commanders have to be fund managers because the victory depends on hundreds of devices, sensors, vehicles, communications, jammers. They have to look in for money. They are investors for new types of weapon. And about the budgets, the extra budgets from volunteer funds of some our battalions reach sometimes some months, reach $1 million per battalion per month, only for drones and for ammunition for drones. Volunteer money on personal account of battalions or brigades, it's a very important factor of our resistance. And thank you for people of Baltic countries too. They support us very strong. Why we can adapt faster than Russians? Nowadays, the victory could depend on the fast changes of radio frequencies of your drones in some combat. You have to plan to buy drones of dozen types. Traditional weapons, communications, combine it during the combat. And every soldier and every strike, every drone have his own cost. Very important conclusion for us that civil society helps the commanders to collect money budgets for adaptation of commanders, adaptation of units. They need the right to buy the weapons and equipment very fast and to spend money for achieve combat readiness.
Yurii,
yes.
you have left 2 minutes, okay?
Okay, yeah. Okay. And adaptation decision from our state, I want to say that Ministry of Digitalizations provided ratings of units for accounting successful strikes. They have his own fund for additional finance. And every strike means some points. Every month you can change your points for bonus, more drones for your units. It's a program for stimulate best strikers. Best operators who can kill better have to take best weapon and more ammunition. Best operators need best weapon. The rating is open for all commanders. It's very important innovation at our war. It's a basement for competition between units, between tactics, between planners. Money war dictate us to provide elements of fund management into the army. Thank you.
Thank you, Yurii. And Mr. Jānis, maybe you have some remarks regarding your military experience and regarding your all other experiences.
How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
Right. I will try to cover 4 points in 5 minutes. But the first is that what Russia is trying to do in Ukraine at the moment is to destroy infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure, and in that sort of way to prevent Ukraine being able to continue the fight. As we heard from Russi, in the next 3 or more years, it's unlikely that Russia would be able to do something quite like that with us. Therefore, I think we have to prepare for a very serious escalation in hybrid warfare. I mean, blowing up energy positions, assassinating high-profile people, and that could come as a very great shock for us because we do not have the wide availability of energy that Ukraine has. Why is this so likely? Well, the release of Vadim Krasikov, who was accepted as an FSB officer after a horrific murder in the broad daylight in the center of Berlin, is a message to the Russian special services: you go and do your nasty work in the West, we will get you back. Second point, Russia's most important and strongest weapon during the last nearly 3 years has been information. Because until the Kursk offensive, most of Western Europe and North America thought that Russia is winning, despite the fact that they totally failed in Kyiv. They lost Kharkiv. They're spending 1,300 soldiers' lives a day to take a few hundred meters in the Donbass. Yet this perception is there. And therefore, we get with nuclear games as well, escalation management on the one hand, that at the top we see that politicians are afraid. And at the bottom end, we see that the populations who really need to support Ukraine are starting to think, well, it's not really a big deal, and getting fed up because it's starting to hit their pockets. We have to work against that. The next point, the fact that NATO over the last 3 years has moved from a position of deterrence by punishment, that is, as Kaja Kallas said, Baltic states will be taken over, and then 6 months later, NATO will get its act together and free us. That is no longer the case. We understand that we have to have deterrence by denial. One statistic: the inner German border during the Cold War was 1,400 kilometers. On the inner German border, against the Warsaw Pact, there were 2 army groups. Each had 4 corps. Each corps had at least 2 divisions. Each division had 2 or more brigades. The total land border between the Baltic states, Russia, Belarus, and Kaliningrad, which is part of Russia, is 235 kilometers more than the inner German border. And we are going through, jumping through all sorts of hoops to persuade ourselves that we need 1 brigade in each of the Baltic states. If it wasn't tragic, it would be laughable. Finally, the American commentator Paul Scharrer in 2015 suggested, as I think a lot of our audience know, that warfare over the ages has gone through 4 phases, or is going through the final phase, from a melee, where you have a fight, to mass, which we saw the epitome in the First World War, to maneuver, finding the indirect approach, which was used in the Second World War very successfully in Kursk by the Russians, and now to swarm. And the idea is that swarm are automated land, air, and sea systems which work by getting intelligence directly from satellites and other intelligence systems, and work according to algorithms, and they could change their position of defense or attack thousands of times faster than the best trained divisional headquarters ever could. At the moment, we are seeing, and the statistics which our Ukrainian colleague showed us, that drones are actually killing more tanks and IFVs than direct action by ground forces. Why are we still thinking in terms of tanks and IFVs? We should be thinking about the next direction in which warfare is going to move, and we had a very clear pointer towards that from our Ukrainian colleague, and I'll stop here, though one could continue.
Thank you so much. Maybe, General, you wanted to react on drones versus IFVs and tanks, no?
Well, I will choose to react on a different point, but okay. That's one also valid. But okay. First of all, on your point on the impact of Russian propaganda, absolutely valid. And I would bring up the topic here is about the resilience of the society, the resilience of key, not only energy infrastructure, but the whole communication infrastructure, and the resilience to the adversary information campaigns. I think this is the area where I would say the eastern flank is the most strongest in the resilience sense, comparing back with the Western European countries. Yeah. And my own experience, 4 years in Belgium and traveling a little bit more on the Western side, shows that actually we, from our side, we need to keep working and explaining to the Western, our friends, about the resilience. What does it mean, how we need to take it and approach? Just a little bit on the drones and the tanks and IFVs. It's a valid point from your side, but nevertheless, I think we need to answer the question of saying, is a drone, is it new technology, or is evolution of technology and the direction for the new warfare? Once we will be able to discuss in those kind of forums and answer to that, we will say, yeah, maybe we don't need the tanks anymore. But currently, from my perspective, I think we need to be careful bringing up by the copy-paste principle from everything what is happening in Ukraine back to our countries and to the NATO. We need to look at the NATO umbrella, NATO frameworks, and everything what could happen in the NATO territory, rather than blindly saying, oh, now it's need to go to the eastern flank, to the NATO countries. Shortly.
Can I quickly respond?
Okay, one quick.
I was being, of course, deliberately provocative there. And we see how Russia is going back to mass, yep, and doing so relatively successfully. The other part of this is that if we are going to have hybrid attacks against the Baltic states, Poland and Finland, then we need to be supporting and financing properly our border guard, our police forces, and our fire and rescue services, which unfortunately not all countries, including my own, have given the right priority to, because they, as we see in Ukraine, are literally on the front line. Because the front line is way behind that, where the armed forces are fighting each other.
Okay,
if I may, yep, to react to this one. So
we have Yurii also on the line.
Oh, sorry,
so
yes,
don't forget.
The priority to Yurii, sorry for that, yeah.
Yurii, maybe you want to add something, react on something that we spoke? No? Do you hear us?
Hello?
Do you hear us?
Very bad, unfortunately. It's some problem with microphone, but yes, I can hear you.
So maybe you have reactions on that, what that our colleague said before? No? Okay, so I guess you had to add something.
Yeah, General. Just shortly. More than support what you're saying, and I'm back to this total defense concept. This is exactly what you remarking on very rightly. We need to be sure that every our citizen has a place in the defense infrastructure and the architecture and playing the vital role.
Yeah.
Should we start from the border guard and continue with the volunteer forces, the customs and so on? So absolutely, we need to look into this.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess we reacted to each other if Yurii would want to react, he will do in the process. Now I would like to go a little bit deeper for 3 parts of questions, maybe 3 questions regarding main issues which we'd like to adapt regarding lessons learned from war in Ukraine, Russian aggression in Ukraine. First of all, regarding structures, we see and saw different perspectives on that. In NATO, we had concept of that brigade combat team. Russia had battle team, battalion tactical team. Now it's brigades, regiments, divisions in Russia. Ukraine has brigades and, I guess, corps, I think we can call it. And NATO mainly relies on brigade, division, corps layers. Are we in a good move? And regarding conventional warfare, are we stepping in, or we should change something on this? So maybe General from you, and we will continue with others.
Okay. First of all, short explanation on the NATO structures, the command structure and the force structure, but broadly you're right, and we're looking at the corps, division, and the brigades. But I would like also to mention that above the corps, it's important the Joint Forces headquarters, Joint Forces commands, which are 3 in the NATO, and also there are the component commands. And those layers are important to enable the divisions and brigades on the ground to act accordingly and create effects towards the enemy. So from my perspective, from looking at the NATO structures, I think it is valid structures. The valid structures, why? Because first of all, every layer, every level have their own responsibilities in the distance, in time, and in the effects. What is important that they are able to synchronize the effects towards the enemy, having adequate enablers. And that's the important part, that we are not only talking about the armor, infantry, but we're also talking about the air defense, deep precision strikes, the intelligence assets. So all those layers, brigade, division, corps, and above, they have different systems in place, which is very important that they are able to do the work in the network. They all working in the secure network, able to exchange the information almost autonomously, able to provide the effects on the enemy. And the structure is still valid.
Thank you. Jānis, maybe you would, I'll add something as practitioner before that conventional, how to say, balancing.
In the Cold War, yeah.
In Cold War, yeah.
What I would want to look at is the reasons for the Ukrainian failure in the attacks of 2023. And there were a number, not least that the support in terms of equipment and training promised by Western supporters of Ukraine was not forthcoming. They did not get the equipment that they needed. But much more appropriate is the fact that old-fashioned tactics by General Surovikin, who thankfully is much too free a thinker to be allowed to continue in his task, and has been kicked in the backside. The Surovikin lines were able to break up the attack, particularly because there was no air cover. And we all know from our staff colleges that if you go with ground troops against an enemy who has air superiority and who can cover minefields or obstacles with fire, you are going to lose. And yet, here we were telling the Ukrainians that this is what you have to do. I think we need to think in different directions ourselves, and that's exactly what the Ukrainians did in the Kharkiv attack and in Kursk. I would also point out that communications and headquarters are extremely dangerous now. headquarters tend to be large. They've been growing over the years. Communications, even though we try to put them in different locations, they are ways of finding us. And if Ukraine is able to use this against Russia, Russia will have learned those lessons to use against us.
That's for sure. Yurii, are you with us? Do you hear us?
Yes, I'm hearing you, but with some problems,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Now we've been speaking about structures, brigade, division, corps. What experience Ukraine has? I heard your opinion not once and not twice about this. Maybe you can elaborate on this.
Yes, all our commanders in every level, they say about the problem of organization in our army, because we don't have, unfortunately, the stable structure on the operative and strategic level. We don't have only brigades level, and for fight in very long front line, we need divisions and we need corps. We need the stable structures on every level. But unfortunately, it's very hard for us to transform our organizations during the war. We did not build these organizations, division organizations and corps organization before the war. And now we have we have to improvise with temporary structures, with improvised staffs on operational and strategic level. It's a very big problem for us, and we discuss, our commanders in our army, they discuss it very intensively every day, that we need stable structure. The aim, why we need the stable structure, the first, it's a problem of responsible. We need to be responsible commander, to looking for responsible commander for every part of front line and in every level. And it's a problem for us, really, and I'm sure that we will solve this problem.
Thank you so much. Very interesting view. I would like to combine last two my questions in one, because we are a little bit short in time. Let's talk about numbers and quality. That question was touched before, and forces and equipment and hardware, weaponry, etc. How to find balance between numbers and quality, because Russia especially have huge numbers, and they try to mitigate quality by enablers, drones one of them. What about NATO? How we should mitigate all those issues when we look at the conventional warfare, big war with a huge amount of forces? In general, what would your opinion on this?
I was expecting that you will direct that question first to Jānis, but
no.
Back to
I
me.
looked at your eyes and I understood that you're expecting this.
Hoping not.
Okay, so yes, it's a great question, and to be honest, there is no easy answer. Every nation in NATO is making own decisions how they, for example, manpowering or providing the force for their own structures. That's one. Looking at the example of Lithuania or this region, we have the conscription, which is definitely important to have in, because the conscription helps to feed the professional soldiers to do the recruitment, also helps to create and fill in the active reserve, and that would help in the wartime with the mobilization. So definitely that's a balance between. When we look at the quantity and quality of the materials or the systems. Of course, the war in Ukraine showing that even 10 T-55 tanks, it is good than zero good Western tank. That's the reality. How we deal with this, I think we need to strike a balance between the technology, the quantity, and the quality. But it's also important factors of employment of what you have. And I think Ukrainians, brave people of Ukraine, they showed the example that it doesn't matter sometimes how many, it's about how you're using the tools which are available for you from your nation. Nevertheless, I would say that NATO should look into, for example, more expandable systems like drones to be ramped up and be able to produce as quick as possible, which I think it's not yet at that level. And the right balance between those expandable items, was the scale economy production, and also the high tech which is used in the war. That would be shortly.
Okay, thank you.
I see we're out of time, but quantity has a quality all of its own. Let us take into account also demography. At the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, the average age of Russians, as far as we can find out, is just over 20, because largely agrarian population, therefore lots of cannon fodder. The average age of Russians at the beginning of 2022, according to them, was 39.4 years. They do not have that sort of cannon fodder. And allow me just to make one point about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have been mentioned. If the West allows Ukraine to fall, then the message to everyone who is watching will be that you can't trust the West. In other words, Japan, North Korea, South Korea may find ways of talking to China, which is the worst thing for Taiwan and US, but in particular, that if you don't have nuclear weapons, and let's remember Ukraine at the end of the Cold War was the third largest nuclear power in the world, and it gave up all its nuclear weapons, and the message is, give up. If you don't have nuclear weapons, you're going to be thumped. Therefore, Iran will go, Saudi will follow, Jordan may follow, South Korea, Japan, and then we are in a very, very sticky position, and maybe many others.
Thank you. Do we have time for Slido?
We have a few questions, yet we don't have too much time for those. So I believe we can choose only a few. Let you be the judge.
Okay. I can read, okay. I'll read first on the top. It will be two questions. How civil defense shapes battlefield and what decisions we have to consider? Maybe, Jānis, from you.
Say again, what was the first?
And what decisions we have to consider?
Civil defense.
Civil defense.
Civil defense, yes.
Well, we see the enormous damage which Russia is putting against Ukraine in order to try to persuade the Ukrainians not to continue to fight. But then we all also remember how the good Western allies bombed Dresden into the Stone Age at the end of the Second World War, incidentally with lots of Baltic refugees in that city for no reason. It did not break Russia, did not break Germany at that time, and it will not break Ukraine, but it means that a civil defense of every kind is an absolute priority, because if it ever comes to it 5, 10 or longer years ahead, we have to be prepared to look after our citizens, and they will then look after our countries.
Okay. General.
Very shortly, civil defense and the fighting force on the field, it's a mutual relationship, which is very important because that builds the trust. The more effective civil defense, the more fighting force on the battlefield is enabled with the spirit moving forward and fighting for the country.
Okay, thank you. Yurii, how civil defense shapes battlefield and what decisions we have to consider? About civil defense, your experiences from Ukraine. I guess we do not have Yurii. Okay, let's roll on. And the most wonderful question, I will direct this to General. Is the Western military leadership ready to integrate emerging resistant units into defense structures during hostilities?
The magic...
Emerging resistant units.
Oh, magic, okay, sorry. Yes, of course. I'll start from the top, and most likely the question is not addressing and not wishing to hear the top answer, but starting from the top, we have a total defense concept which is agreed by the leadership, and then we have a very clear implementation tool on the ground. And you mentioned today during your presentation about the resistant organizations and units in the regions. Then we have National Defense Volunteer Forces and the so-called the commandant services. All those three entities definitely is finding the place in the total defense concept of Lithuania. And if it's not yet, it's coming. We just need to be a little bit patient on that.
And I will add one sentence on this, that crucially important is rules of engagement of those integrated emerging resistant units, because you can't shoot every way you want, so you must be integrated. Maybe from your side, something?
I don't think I've got anything much to add, but rules of engagement, absolutely crucial, particularly with air, because air power will be one of the strengths which NATO will have should it ever come to a direct war, which is one of the reasons I don't think that Russia is likely to be attacking NATO in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Yurii, maybe your, I couldn't say last comments, but comments to the end. Do you have any comments to sum up the discussions? Last words? You don't hear. Do you hear us?
Excuse me?
Do you hear us? Maybe you have last comments?
I can hear. Excuse me.
Okay. So thank you so much for this productive discussion. I guess it wasn't too long. We had issues. To sum up, we have lots of learn from Ukraine. Ukraine have lots of learn from NATO, and we have one enemy, and we have nothing to do better to be adaptive and make decisions better and structures better. So thank you. And Mantas, your call.
Thank you very much for the speakers. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was good. Thank you. Thank you.